I recently had a conversation with my wife of 11 years, and sadly, it ended with her in tears. It took me back to a similar situation 3 years ago when I nearly lost my job. Back then, Emma, who also goes by Emma, was absolutely distraught at the thought of me missing our anniversary. She was so upset, in fact, that she insisted I rush home. Fast forward to today, and now it's her who won't be around for our anniversary. I didn't say anything to try to change her mind, even though I probably should have. Still, when I look back on the past 12 years, they've been the happiest of my life. When I first met Emma, she was 24, just starting out in her career in sales. She came to our architectural firm to pitch us on advertising in some high-end magazines, something we couldn't afford at the time. Even in the middle of a busy crowd, I couldn't help but notice her. She had this black hair that just captivated me. After I talked it over with my partner, he helped me get her attention long enough for me to ask her out. After our first meeting, she told me she knew we couldn't pay for her services, but that didn't stop me. I fell for her hard, even with that knowledge. Over the next 6 months, our relationship blossomed. She eventually moved in with me as she shifted from a nomadic lifestyle to settling into a stable office job. 4 months after that, we were married. Every day, I still feel like the luckiest guy in the world for convincing her to marry me. With a sense of urgency, I called my boss's number again. I've been with the company since the very beginning. When Ryan first launched the company, our team of just 4 designers managed to achieve remarkable success by drastically cutting down production time in several areas. "Ryan, I know you're there. Please pick up," I pleaded into the phone. Finally, I heard his voice on the other end. "John, I'm really busy right now," he replied flatly. "I know," I said, keeping it short. "I'm leaving now and won't be back until Monday." There was a pause before Ryan asked, "Leaving? Where are you going?" "I'm heading out to celebrate my anniversary with Emma," I told him. "I'll be back on Monday." "Well, have a good trip then," he said, his tone light. "And don't forget to knock before you enter." I chuckled. "You always know how to make me laugh," I said. "You'd be surprised how often I hear that," he replied, clearly in a joking mood. "Just don't forget about me while you're off on your adventure." I couldn't help but smile. "Deal. See you on Monday." I didn't hang up right away, though. I needed to ask Ryan's secretary, Lily, for a favor. She always knew how to get things done, and right then I needed a plane ticket. After talking with her, I went home to pack. Just as I was getting my suitcase together, the phone rang. It was Lily. "You've got 45 minutes to get to the airport for security," she said, sounding efficient as always. "Your ticket's waiting for you at the counter in your name. The return flight's set for Sunday afternoon at 1:30. Unfortunately, there weren't any rooms available at Emma's hotel, but I got one for you just 2 blocks away." "Thanks, Lily," I said, feeling a bit of relief. "I'll see you Monday." I rushed to finish packing, grabbing my shaving kit and quickly checking the room, turning off the coffee maker, which wasn't something I usually did before leaving. In a hurry, I headed to the car. Over the years, I'd learned a few shortcuts to help me get to places faster, and even though I was rushing, I made it to the airport with plenty of time to spare. After checking in, going through security, and boarding, I finally settled into my seat on the plane. I put on my headphones and cranked up the music, something to calm my nerves. I've never been great with flying, so the tunes always help me relax. About 3 hours into the flight, I was jolted awake by a tap on my shoulder. I had fallen asleep, which wasn't a surprise, given how little sleep I'd been getting lately. A lot of it was due to work stress, but it was also the tension at home between Emma and me. We'd been going through a rough patch for the past few months, with her keeping a distance from me. It all started when she found out one of her colleagues from another department had been promoted and was taking over her position. Emma was determined to prove that the decision was a mistake, and she threw herself into proving her worth. For the first 2 weeks, she came home absolutely drained, talking nonstop about her strategy to outshine this guy, Mike Anderson. But as time passed, her drive started to fade. Then, after a couple of weeks, she mentioned that she and Mike were starting to cooperate. That made me uneasy. I started to get paranoid, wondering if something more than just work was going on between them. But Emma always reassured me, making it clear that there was nothing to worry about. As I grabbed my bag from the overhead compartment, I found myself trying to think of a way to invite Emma to dinner without ruining the surprise. The taxi driver who had brought me to my hotel had mentioned a nice little dimly lit restaurant between our two hotels, and it sounded perfect. After checking in at my hotel, I rushed to take a quick shower. I had to make sure I wasn't going to miss Emma before she left for dinner. Glancing at the clock in the lobby, I saw it was almost 5:30. After looking around the busy street outside, I figured I could just walk to the restaurant. It was close enough, and I didn't want to waste any more time. The walk wasn't difficult, and I made sure to remember the little restaurant the taxi driver had mentioned. It was just a few steps from her hotel. When I exited the cab, I left the driver a generous tip, hoping that would help set the right tone for the evening. I made it to the hotel lobby by 5:50 and found a spot in line at the reception desk. The woman behind the counter smiled and waved me forward. "Hello," I greeted her warmly. "I'm John Grant. I was wondering if my wife, Emma Grant, is in her room right now. If she is, I'd love to surprise her." The woman paused, double-checking the name. "Emma Grant?" she repeated, taking a moment to consult her notes. "Yes, she's a guest here. Let me check if she's in her room." She dialed the room and after a moment turned back to me with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, sir. There was no answer. Would you like to leave a message?" I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me, but I didn't let it show. "No, not yet." "I was hoping to surprise her," I said, trying to hide my frustration. "It's our anniversary tomorrow, and I'd really appreciate it if you didn't mention this conversation to her. Can you do that?" The woman reassured me with a polite smile. "No problem at all, sir. I won't say anything." I gave her a nod of thanks. "I'm probably going to check out a restaurant nearby. Hopefully luck will be on my side," I added, trying to keep my tone light. She smiled and wished me a pleasant evening. "Good night, sir. I hope you have a lovely anniversary tomorrow." I smiled back, grateful for her kindness. "Thank you." As I walked to the far end of the lobby, I spotted a large, noisy hall filled with people. They were all engaged in various activities, some working, some eating, some just chatting. It was so crowded that I knew finding Emma in here would be nearly impossible. Then I noticed a restroom tucked away at the back of the building, so I decided to check there, figuring it might be quieter. I scanned the area, looking left and right, desperate to find some sign of her. But despite all my searching, I couldn't spot her anywhere. It was as if she had disappeared completely. I walked out of the restroom, my heart pounding in my chest. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I had planned everything down to the smallest detail, and yet nothing was going the way I had imagined. Emma's absence tonight felt like the final straw, a cold reminder that things between us weren't what they used to be. My mind raced with a million questions, but the one that stood out the most was, where is she? After finishing my business, I positioned myself near the entrance of the corridor and once again scanned the room. It felt hopeless. With the place packed like this, finding her seemed nearly impossible. But then, out of nowhere, I caught a faint sound of laughter that was unmistakably hers. I followed the wall with my eyes, trying to spot her, but towering booths blocked my view, giving me only brief glimpses of the people sitting inside them, men and women engaged in their own conversations. I hesitated to approach any of the tables, unwilling to risk her seeing me before I was ready to confront her. I retraced my steps and shifted my gaze toward the wall, inching my way down the row of tables. One by one, I passed them until I reached the third booth from where I'd been standing, and there she was, Emma, sitting with a man I didn't recognize. She was glowing, dressed in that elegant dress she always wore on nights out. They seemed so at ease with each other, their conversation flowing effortlessly. My heart started to race, the way they interacted so relaxed, so comfortable. It was more than just a casual dinner with a colleague. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind spinning with questions. What was really going on between them? I gripped the doorframe for support as the man leaned in closer to her. Without warning, she bent her head down and their lips met in a soft, tender kiss. The scene hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly backed away from the doorway and moved to the center of the hall. I sank into one of the padded chairs with a high backrest, trying to regain my composure. Time seemed to blur as I kept my eyes locked on their table, unable to look away. A few moments later, I heard her laughter again, and my attention snapped back to her. She was walking beside the man now, holding his hand with both of hers, their closeness unmistakable. They strolled past me no more than 15 feet away. Though they were talking, my eyes were fixed on the adoring expression she wore as she gazed up at him. It was the kind of look I hadn't seen on her face in a long time, the kind of look a woman gives a man when she's deeply in love with him. It hit me hard. I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a moment I was speechless. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I hadn't realized how much I had missed seeing that look, or how much it hurt to know it wasn't meant for me anymore. I knew I had to leave. My emotions were a mix of anger and hurt, but also something else, something darker. I turned on my heel and headed for the exit, my expression probably betraying the storm raging inside me. Fueled by a surge of determination, I stepped out onto the sidewalk. My eyes never left them as they walked away, her arm linked affectionately through his. I watched as they turned a corner and disappeared into a restaurant I'd noticed earlier. I snapped out of my daze and realized what I was doing. I couldn't just stand there, lost in the moment. I hurried back toward the door, trying to regain some semblance of control. I slowed my pace, giving them time to distance themselves before I re-entered. When I finally came to a stop, I took a few deep breaths to steady myself. The anger was still there, but I knew I had to keep it together. There was meaning in the expressions on their faces, something deep, something I didn't fully understand, but something I couldn't ignore. Summoning what little resolve I had left, I pushed open the door and cautiously stepped back inside. The entrance was unattended, so I moved quietly, sticking to the shadows. As I stood there, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the dim lighting, I took in the room. Finally, my gaze landed on them again. They were sitting together at a small table for two at the far end of the room. I made my way over, my hands brushing the walls as I walked. When I finally reached the table, I slid into a small chair nearby. The waitress appeared almost immediately, her voice breaking through my fog of thoughts. "What can I get for you, dear?" she asked cheerfully. "Double scotch on the rocks," I replied, barely glancing at her. As I waited for my drink, I overheard their conversation. The man's voice was low, but I caught his words. "Our meeting tomorrow isn't until 10 o'clock, so we can celebrate late into the night." Emma replied with a laugh. "I'm glad you didn't let him manipulate you into going home. We wouldn't miss our 2-month anniversary for anything." "2 months already?" he said with a smile. "It could have been even longer," he added, reminiscing, "if you had accepted my offer at the end of my first week at work." Emma chuckled. "I had to play the innocent girl with you, especially since I was supposedly married," she said, shaking her head at the memory. "That's right," he said. "Carol actually told me you liked me." I couldn't believe my ears. Carol. That's who had been talking to her about him. This wasn't just some fling. This was more. Much more. Emma spoke up again, her voice low but clear. "We should do something nice for Carol. She played a big part in bringing us together." At that moment, the waitress arrived with their drinks. Without missing a beat, they raised their glasses in a toast. "To the incredible 2 months we've had," the man said, "and to many more." I felt like I was going to choke. As their glasses clinked, I muttered under my breath, "I'll do whatever it takes." I watched, unable to tear my eyes away as they exchanged a tender smile. I hadn't seen Emma smile like that in so long. It was a smile I never thought she'd give anyone but me. The waitress placed my glass in front of me, interrupting my thoughts. "Here you go, dear. Is that all?" I handed her a $10 bill without looking up, my focus back on the couple across from me. They exchanged a few more words, glancing up at me briefly, but to them I was just another stranger in the background. Emma caught the man's gaze and, noticing me for the first time, turned to look at me. "You know," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, A guy should always carry a camera for moments like this. Her expression froze, and I could see the realization wash over her face as I added, "Your look right now. It's perfect. You could be on a poster." She moved her lips soundlessly, but I could read the guilt in her eyes. 2 months. What a special anniversary, I thought bitterly. I leaned back, making sure my words stung. 2 months? Well, I guess that's a symbol of passion and prosperity, right? A lovely couple like you definitely deserves a gift. Without another word, I tossed the ring I'd been carrying in her direction. "Here's a surprise," I added, watching as her face turned pale. But Mike wasn't done. He interrupted with a loud exclamation, his temper flaring. Realizing that staying there any longer would only escalate the situation, I turned to Emma, who was already trying to calm him down. "Tell him how lucky he is that he wasn't in my home," I said, my voice cold with rage. "I'll get in touch with you about your things," I added, my words clipped. "If you're smart, you'll avoid coming to my house. Ice might help with that nose of yours." Without waiting for a response, I turned and left, striding out of the club with my head high. I couldn't stand to be around them any longer. As I walked briskly back to the hotel, the weight of the situation hit me. I couldn't believe it had come to this, but the anger didn't subside. I didn't care if Emma knew where I was going. At that point, I just needed distance. In the picture, I stood beside Emma, but what caught my attention was the way she gazed into his eyes. It made me doubt everything I thought I knew. Had I really seen it all? I wasn't one to be easily deceived, but the image in front of me suggested otherwise. I considered myself an exception to the stereotype that men had poor memories. Like most women, Emma often tested my recall, asking, "Do you remember this?" or "Do you remember that?" Unfortunately for her, I remembered everything. Every conversation, every plan, every secret whispered in the dark. The problem now, though, was that the more I thought about it, the more I questioned what I might have missed. I recalled the first time I'd seen him, the man who'd been flirting with her from the moment they met. She'd claimed she rejected his advances, citing her commitment to our marriage, but the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been wrong from the start. 2 months had passed since I first noticed him, and if I'd missed that, what else had I failed to see? As the realization sunk in, I formulated a two-part plan. First, I would go home, pack up all of Emma's things, and take them to her mother's house. There was no way I could face her right now. Of course, I knew her mother would blame me for everything, but the truth was inescapable. I had witnessed it. Our family life was unraveling before my eyes. The drive home was a blur. I couldn't remember much about the journey. Time seemed to dissolve in a haze of thoughts and emotions. Stepping into the dimly lit house, I felt a strange unease settle in my chest. It should have been familiar, but tonight it felt like a stranger's house. After dropping my bag by the door, I made my way to the kitchen, but something compelled me to turn on the answering machine. Emma's voice filled the room, desperate and pleading. "John, please don't do anything rash. I'm heading home to talk. Please wait until I get there." Her voice sounded pained, and it made my blood run cold. I wasn't interested in hearing it, especially not in that tone. She wanted to talk? There was nothing left to say. I reacted impulsively, slamming my fist into the countertop. The harsh sound reverberated in the silence of the house. My actions might have been rash, but I needed to protect myself from making foolish decisions. The truth was, I couldn't sleep that night, not with a knot of anger and hurt tightening in my chest. I went out to the garage and gathered all the suitcases Emma had accumulated over the years. I selected a large black one and a bag for her clothes. My hands moved mechanically, packing her things as if it were some mundane chore. I sifted through her closet, picking out a few items I thought might be necessary. The process felt surreal. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It wasn't supposed to end. There was an odd moment when I came across the drawer of her underwear, something I hadn't opened in years. A strange thought crossed my mind, a fleeting idea that maybe, just maybe, I should grab some hot dogs. But I immediately dismissed it. The thought of seeing her mother again filled me with dread, so I opted for a solitary errand instead. I drove to the hardware store and bought new locks. When I returned home, the weight of everything hit me. I couldn't leave her belongings scattered in the front room. It would feel like a betrayal to my own heart. Without thinking, I loaded everything into the car, drove to her mother's house, and unloaded the bags by the garage. I didn't want to burden Greg with extra work, especially since neither his wife nor Emma would be helping him. Just as I set the third box down, my mother-in-law appeared. "Hi, John. What's all this? What's going on?" she asked, her face pale as she took in the scene. I didn't hesitate to explain. Well, when Emma arrived, she might need her clothes. Initially, I thought she'd bring them herself, but I couldn't wait any longer. They were cluttering up the front room. Linda's expression froze, and she looked at me in confusion. "What do you mean when Emma arrives? I thought she wasn't in town yet. Why would her things be here?" I shrugged, trying to keep my tone even. "I'm not entirely sure how she plans to sort things out, but I assumed she might stay with you temporarily. She may be considering moving in with the person she's been spending time with, but I can't say for sure. That's why I brought her things over." Her face turned even paler, and I could see the panic creeping in. "What are you implying? How can you accuse my daughter of such things? She had to stay there for work. She'd never cheat on you." Her voice quivered, nearing hysteria. I could almost hear the denial in her words, but it didn't change what I'd seen. "I saw them together last time," I continued, keeping my voice steady. "They looked happy. They were celebrating their 2-month anniversary at a nightclub near their hotel. I tried to get Emma to come home for our anniversary, but she said she couldn't." Linda's face twisted in disbelief. "But why would Emma do something like that? You must be mistaken." "I thought I was," I admitted. "That's why I hopped on a plane to be with her. But when I arrived, I found them together. They were having dinner. It wasn't just dinner, it was romantic. Their whole atmosphere. It was something I could never have with her." That's when I knew. I didn't want to intrude on them. I wasn't sure what to do, but I couldn't just walk away. Linda stood there, her mouth open in shock. "That's not possible." "I didn't want to believe it either," I said, my voice growing cold. "But I witnessed it firsthand. For the past 2 months, I've been living alone while she's been living with him. He's the one she's been with. And for the past 2 months, she's been lying to me every single day, looking me in the eye without any remorse." Her face crumpled in shock, her hands trembling. "How can you say such things? She's my daughter. You've been with her for 11 years. This isn't right." "I don't know what to say," I replied. "I've seen enough. You can support her all you want, but I've made my choice. She's made hers. She has strong feelings for him, and now it's time for her to be with him. I won't have her in my house anymore. And when she's done playing games, I'll direct her here. You can see for yourself who's lying." Linda stood frozen, the weight of the situation finally hitting her. I could feel the finality in my words, but I couldn't stop myself now. Before I left, I turned and said, "Tell her exactly what I said. And when she calls, be sure to let her know that I'm waiting for her to explain herself. I'm curious how she plans to handle this." I left without another word, my thoughts heavy with the realization that this was it. I didn't know what would happen next, but I had finally stopped waiting for answers. The hours that followed felt like they were suspended in time. I didn't know what to do with myself. I wandered aimlessly around the house, trying to occupy my thoughts with anything that wasn't Emma or the decisions I had made. I found myself in the garage setting up an improvised workspace to distract myself. But it was no use. The weight of everything still hung over me. The house that once felt like home now seemed foreign, and I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Then the doorbell rang. I froze, my heart racing. It wasn't a knock. No, it was the doorbell. My mind scrambled to process the situation. Could it be her? Would she come here? I didn't know. But I had a feeling it was her, so I pushed my feelings aside and walked toward the door. When I opened it, there she was. Emma stood on the other side, her face pale, eyes red as if she'd been crying. She looked almost fragile, a far cry from the confident woman I once knew. I couldn't read her expression. It wasn't anger or fear or guilt. No, it was something far harder to pinpoint. But it was enough to make me step back instinctively. She pushed the door open slightly and entered without saying anything, closing it behind her. I tried knocking, but you didn't hear me, she murmured, her voice small. I figured you'd be in the garage. I was just tidying up, I responded mechanically, watching her eyes flicker around the space as she took in the disarray. Emma sighed, looking at me, her gaze full of sadness and resignation. Well, Mom already called me. Looks like you've already made up your mind about what to do with me. Her words struck me harder than I expected. I didn't want to be here, and I certainly didn't want to see her like this, but I couldn't avoid it any longer. I nodded, not trusting my voice. There was nothing to say anymore. The silence that stretched between us was thick with unspoken words. What did you expect? I finally asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. That I wouldn't mind you having an affair? Emma hesitated, eyes downcast for a long moment. I could see the conflict inside her. She knew I was right, and yet she couldn't face it. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost apologetic. I guess I wasn't thinking clearly, at least not rationally. I was overwhelmed. She choked on the word, like it was something she hadn't expected to feel. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't want to hear any excuses. I couldn't. The image of her with him, laughing, kissing, celebrating their anniversary, it was too much. You know what? It's a shame, Emma, because all I did was think, I said, the bitterness in my voice more evident now. I've spent months thinking about us, about our life together, but now it's clear that you've been thinking about him, and not about us. She flinched as if my words had struck her physically. I never wanted this to happen. You have to believe me. Believe you? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You've lied to me for 2 months, Emma. 2 months of my life, gone. And for what? So you could play this little game with him. Were you really so unhappy with me? My voice cracked, and I cursed myself inwardly. But I couldn't stop now. Her face crumpled, the tears that had been threatening to fall finally spilling over. I didn't want to hurt you. I never meant for it to end like this. But the damage was done. The words were out there, hanging between us like a heavy fog. I stared at her for a long time, not knowing what else to say, not knowing how to fix it. Maybe I wasn't supposed to fix it. Maybe it was too broken already. I took a step back, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I can't do this anymore, Emma. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay. You've made your choice, and I've made mine. I watched her, her expression full of regret, pain, and something I hadn't expected, relief. It was like the weight of the secret she had been carrying had finally lifted, and now she could breathe. And for a second I hated her for it, because while I had been drowning in our shattered marriage, she had already moved on. I'll leave, Emma whispered, barely audible. I don't want to cause you more pain. The words were like a slap to my face. Leave? No, Emma. You've already left. You've been gone for months. This is just the final step. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. She didn't say anything else. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the garage, the door swinging closed behind her with a dull thud. I stood there for a long while after she left, the silence enveloping me, drowning me in its suffocating stillness. I hadn't expected her to leave so quietly, so quickly, but in a way it was fitting. The final chapter of our marriage had been written in silence, in words that couldn't be unsaid. There was nothing left to say now. I took a deep breath and turned back into the garage, my mind a storm of confusion and disbelief. I still didn't know what to do. The truth was I wasn't even sure what I wanted anymore, but I knew I couldn't keep chasing someone who had already made up their mind. As I walked through the house, I found the one thing that had been my constant, the ring, my wedding band. It had been such a symbol of everything I had once believed in. But now it felt like a foreign object. I didn't want it anymore. I took the ring off, my fingers cold as I held it in my palm. The weight of it was too much for me to bear. I set it down on the kitchen counter with a clink and walked out of the house without looking back. It was over. The tension in the room was palpable as Emma handed me the ring. It was a symbol of everything we had once shared, a decade of commitment, trust, and the life we had built together. Now it felt like a relic of a past that was no longer mine to hold. You know, I said, staring at the ring in my hand, it's funny how these things work. A ring meant to symbolize a forever bond. But look at us now. You're handing it to me like a piece of trash. She didn't respond immediately, her gaze drifting between me and the ring. I could tell she was struggling to find the words. I didn't mean it to end like this, she finally murmured. I never thought we'd get here. Yeah, well, I didn't either, I said bitterly, gripping the ring tightly. But here we are. Emma took a deep breath and seemed to steel herself for something. You're really done with me, aren't you? You're not even going to try to salvage this. Salvage it? I scoffed. You think there's anything left to salvage after everything you've done? You've made your choice, Emma. You've made it crystal clear, and I'm not going to beg you to stay or pretend that I don't see what's right in front of me. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes again. I didn't want it to be this way. I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to lose you. Then why didn't you stop? I asked, the words more painful than I expected. If you didn't want to lose me, why did you let it go this far? You didn't even try to make it work. It was easier to lie to me, to betray me, than to face whatever was going wrong. I didn't know how to fix it, she whispered, her voice trembling. It wasn't just the affair, it was everything. I lost myself somewhere along the way, and I couldn't come back. Really? You couldn't? Or you just didn't want to? I felt the anger rising in me again, but I fought to keep it in check. There was no point in getting lost in a shouting match. The truth was enough. Emma, I don't even recognize you anymore, and maybe that's on me too. Maybe I missed all the signs. But the fact that you could look me in the eye day after day and lie to me, I don't know who you are anymore, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. Emma stood there, her expression hollow. I don't want to do this. I don't want to fight. No, Emma, you don't get to avoid this anymore. You made your choice. You fought for him. You betrayed me in every way possible. And I don't even know what to feel anymore. My voice cracked slightly, but I held firm. I used to think I knew you. I used to think that if we worked hard enough, we could get through anything, but you didn't care enough to fight for us, so I'm done fighting for you. The silence between us stretched on, filled only by the sound of her soft, uneven breaths. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice so small I could barely hear her. I'm sorry for everything. I never meant for this to happen, but I can't undo it. I know you can't, I said, my voice hardening again. But I can, and I will. She nodded, as though accepting the finality of my words, but there was something else in her eyes, something that made me doubt whether she truly understood the gravity of the decision she had made. Maybe she thought there was still room for some kind of reconciliation, some form of apology that could undo the damage. But I had made my peace with the fact that we were over. I'll pack my things and leave soon, she said, her voice quieter now. Give me a few days to find a place. I don't care where you go, Emma. Just go, I replied. I'll be out of here soon enough, too. She looked at me, her face tight with a mixture of sadness and frustration. I'm sorry, John, for everything. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The only thing I could do now was move forward. I had to let go of her, of the past, of all the years that now felt meaningless. I didn't want to waste any more of my life on someone who had made her choice, someone who had already walked away in every way that mattered. As she turned to leave, I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, the ring still clenched in my hand. There was no going back, no rewinding time. It was over. The door clicked shut behind her. I dropped the ring onto the counter with a final resigned sigh, and then I walked away. The door clicked shut with a soft final sound, and the house, once filled with the echoes of shared moments, now felt eerily empty. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the spot where Emma had been just seconds before, the weight of the conversation sinking in. It was over. No more pretending, no more hoping that somehow things would get better. I walked to the living room and sank into the couch, the silence wrapping itself around me like a heavy blanket. The walls, once so familiar, seemed to close in, reminding me of all the things I'd lost. The furniture that had seen years of laughter, arguments, and quiet moments of peace, now it all felt like it belonged to someone else. Emma and I had built this life together, but now she was gone, and the house, this life, was just an empty shell. I ran my hand through my hair, feeling the weight of the ring still in my palm. The one symbol of everything that had been, now a weight I didn't want to carry anymore. I glanced at it again, that simple gold band that had once meant forever. But forever was a lie, wasn't it? I stood up and walked over to the kitchen, setting the ring on the counter. I wasn't angry anymore. Maybe I was too tired to be angry. There had been too much anger, too much confusion. I didn't need to keep it. I didn't need to keep anything that reminded me of her or of us. The sound of the doorbell broke the quiet, and for a second I thought it was Emma. Maybe she had come back to beg for forgiveness or to explain herself, to try and salvage something. But no, the voice on the other side of the door was unfamiliar. I opened it slowly, not expecting much. A man stood on the porch, holding a stack of papers in one hand, a thick envelope in the other. He was dressed in a neat suit, and his face was unreadable. "John Nelson?" he asked in a clipped voice. "Yeah," I replied, my voice hoarse from the tension of the past few hours. "I have a delivery for you," the man said, handing me the envelope. "It's from your attorney." My pulse quickened, but I didn't show it. I took the envelope and tore it open. Inside there was a stack of legal papers, neatly organized, a divorce petition, and other documents that felt too official to be real. The final step in the process. Emma had already started, and it hit me hard. I scanned the papers quickly, my eyes catching on the familiar details: division of assets, custody arrangements. Even though we didn't have kids, it still stung, and the terms of the settlement. I didn't need to read everything to know it was over. The man stood there, watching me with a neutral expression. I was about to say something, maybe ask him to confirm everything, but I didn't. What would it matter? I looked back up at him. "Thanks," I said flatly, and closed the door without waiting for a reply. I leaned back against the door for a moment, staring at the papers in my hands. It felt surreal. My heart was numb, like a muscle that had been overused and was finally giving out. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the months of secrecy, the countless little betrayals that had added up to one big decision. Emma's affair hadn't been just a betrayal of our marriage, it was a betrayal of everything we had been, a lie built on top of years of truth. I felt sick to my stomach, not because I was still in love with her. No, I had let go of that love a long time ago, but because I had invested so much of myself into a relationship that had been so hollow. So much of my identity had been tied to her, to us, that now I didn't even know who I was anymore. The night passed slowly. I barely slept. The next few weeks were a blur. I went through the motions, packing up my things, sorting through the house, signing the papers. The house was finally sold, and I moved into a small apartment. The freedom felt strange. The emptiness felt stranger. But there was a strange sense of peace in it, too. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I didn't hear from Emma for a while. No texts, no calls. And at first that left a hollow ache in my chest. But soon it faded into something else, something calmer, like the air clearing after a storm. I started to realize that I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need to hold on to the past. One day I ran into her at the grocery store. She looked different, faded somehow, as if the light she once had was now dimmed. She smiled awkwardly when she saw me, but I didn't feel the usual rush of anger or sadness. "John," she said, her voice unsure, "how are you?" I gave her a nod. "I'm good, getting through it." She bit her lip, clearly struggling with something. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry, for everything, for what I did to you." I didn't know what to say at first. I'd heard those words so many times before and they always felt hollow. But this time I was different. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need anything from her anymore. I know, I said, and it wasn't unkind. It was simply a fact. There was an awkward pause. Emma looked at me for a moment, her eyes searching, but I knew there was nothing left to find. We had both moved on. I hope you're happy, John, she said quietly. You deserve to be happy. I nodded and then I turned and walked away. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I could face it now. I had let go of the past, let go of Emma, of the person I thought I knew. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, and maybe that was all that mattered. The rest was just a matter of time, a place where she is trying to come to terms with everything that has happened. According to her father, she's been struggling with feelings of isolation and guilt, as if she's been caught in some endless cycle of poor decisions. I never reached out to her after that day, not once. As far as I was concerned, our paths had already diverged, and there was no need for any more closure. I had lived through our marriage, witnessed its unraveling, and now it was simply over. I had learned a lot about myself during those painful months of separation, but perhaps the most important lesson was that the only person who could truly change my life was me, and I had made that decision. Emma's life after our divorce, though, seemed to spiral. She was once this vibrant, strong woman who I thought could handle anything. But in the end, her need for validation and constant attention led her to make reckless decisions that not only damaged her career but her reputation. Hearing about her encounters with men, especially those with questionable intentions, only made me feel pity. I couldn't bring myself to feel anger or frustration at her anymore. She had become a shadow of the person she once was. It wasn't long before I realized that I had also changed. The man who once would have tried to fix everything, who would have fought for her despite everything, no longer existed. I had learned that sometimes you can't save someone from themselves. Sometimes people have to go through their own pain and learn their own lessons, no matter how hard it is to watch them struggle. As for me, life went on. I threw myself into work, surrounded myself with friends who didn't carry the weight of the past. Slowly, I began to find pieces of myself that I had lost during our relationship. The years we had spent together had left a mark, but they didn't define me anymore. I was no longer the person who clung to someone who couldn't love him back. I had learned the hard way that love, if it's real, should never feel like a one-way street. A few months after the divorce, I began seeing someone new. She was kind, patient, and most importantly, she was honest with me. There were no games, no pretenses. We were just two people trying to build something together, starting with a clean slate. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I could feel the warmth of hope creeping back into my life. One afternoon, I ran into Emma's father at a local coffee shop. He had an apologetic look on his face, as if he expected me to be angry with him for his daughter's mistakes. We exchanged a few pleasantries, and he told me that Emma had been going to therapy now, trying to understand the damage she had done, both to herself and to the people around her. I could see the pain in his eyes. It was clear he still cared deeply for her, even though she had hurt him too. She's really struggling, he said quietly. I don't know what to do anymore. I think she finally realized that she's lost everything she really cared about, but I'm not sure if she can ever fix it. I thought about his words for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. I didn't wish Emma any more pain. I didn't wish her happiness either. I simply wanted to move on with my life. Whatever she was going through, whatever consequences she was facing, it was her journey now and I had no place in it. I hope she figures it out, I said, offering him a brief but sincere smile. But I'm moving forward too. I hope you can do the same. And that was the truth. I had moved on. My life, though imperfect, was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I was content with that. A year passed. My life had found a new rhythm. I no longer woke up in the dead of night replaying the worst moments of my marriage in my mind. I wasn't angry or resentful anymore, though I couldn't forget what Emma had done. There were scars, but they had started to heal. I was no longer tied to a past that I couldn't change. I had learned the value of forgiveness, not for her, but for myself. I didn't expect anything from Emma, and in a way that gave me the freedom I had been searching for. It wasn't about revenge or punishment anymore. It was simply about moving on, letting go of what didn't serve me. And as painful as it had been, I knew it had been the right choice. As for Emma, I heard snippets here and there, whispers from mutual acquaintances, some news of her being let go from her second job after a short stint, her therapy sessions, and rumors about her starting yet another new relationship. The details were always fuzzy, but it was clear she was still trying to find herself, still trying to rebuild her life after the choices she made. And I realized, just as I had done, she would have to find her own way. She would have to rebuild her life the hard way, just like I had. Only then would she truly understand the cost of her actions. But for me, it didn't matter anymore. I had closed the door on the past, and as I opened the next chapter, I knew it would be one I was writing for myself.